The latest polling numbers have Democrats behind the scenes and out in public very worried about where President Joe Biden stands in the current polling. Joining me now to take a look at it are Tré Goins-Phillips and Billy Hallowell. And Billy, let's start with you. And you've had a look at these numbers, and it's not very good for the president right now.
It's not. And when you look at these numbers and you look at past election cycles, which is something that's important to do, what we're watching right now is Trump is actually the closest he's ever been in the polls to a Democrat running against him at this point before an election. And we're still, over a year out from the election. But when you look at the Real Clear Politics average, which is a great number to look at because it averages all the polls together, right now, President Biden is at 44.5%. And Trump is at 44.1%. So there's just a 0.4 spread between them. That is a tie. They are virtually tied right now. And never before have we seen in the past two election cycles Trump that close, let alone tied to his likely rival.
I think this is maybe less, not that it's not good news for Trump, but I think it's less about Trump and more that this is just really bad news for Joe Biden, that the four-time indicted probable potential Republican nominee that he'll likely be running against is neck and neck with the incumbent president. And Biden's approval ratings have been in the 30s too. So I don't know if you could maybe flesh out, Billy, some of those numbers. Where does Biden stand on his own right now, much less in a 2024 hypothetical matchup?
Yeah, no, absolutely. What you just said is very true. And when you look at those statistics, those numbers, they're not very good for him, obviously. But one of the interesting measures that just came from a CNN poll this week, they asked, look, would you rather have Joe Biden or any Republican candidate, right? And 46% of registered voters said that they would take any Republican presidential nominee, that person would be better than Biden in next year's election. Only 32% said that the sitting president would be the best choice or a better choice than somebody from the GOP. That is a stunning indictment. When we're talking about indictments statistically, only to have 32% saying, hey, we would take Biden over one of those rivals. So that points to, I think, a number of issues that I'm sure we'll talk about here that are going on right now in the country, but almost half of registered voters saying they would take the Republican.
Yeah, and you have among the GOP field, it's interesting when you look at the hypothetical head-to-head matchups, most of them perform pretty neck and neck with President Biden, which is saying a lot considering some of these Republicans aren't polling very well currently in the GOP side of things. But one of the candidates, actually, when you put them in these hypothetical matchups, actually jumps up, and it's kind of a surprising one.
Yeah, and this is why it's so important not to look at polls and just say, oh, well, everybody loves this person in the country. Well, it's no, within a party, right? When you look at the party polls, Trump is dominating. Somebody like Nikki Haley, she's getting 7% of Republican, votes hypothetically right now. But when you do the matchups, as you were saying, most candidates are within 2 points of Biden, but Nikki Haley in a matchup to Biden, she is the only one that comes out 6 points ahead. It's 49% to 43% for Biden. That's really notable. And again, it's important we understand the complexities of elections because she's only getting 7%, small percentages of the Republican vote. But nationally, and this is why you got to look beyond party, she's actually performing the best out of all the candidates right now.
Something too that I think is fascinating, and this seems to happen every cycle on the Republican side at least, is there's an enormous field of Republicans running for president. And like we've all said, we're quite a ways out, but I do think the numbers are interesting. I think it's fascinating that Nikki Haley is getting a bump after that first Republican debate. And I'm also kind of surprised that Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, isn't polling, not that he's doing poorly, but that he isn't polling a little bit better, that he isn't really the main competitor against Trump. He has been, but he kind of goes back and forth. Sometimes it's Haley, sometimes it's DeSantis, sometimes it's Trump. I don't know if you could shed maybe a little bit of light on that and the inner workings of the GOP primary right now.
Yeah, this I find incredibly it's one of the most fascinating elements of this, because the assumption would be among some, well, DeSantis would do better against Biden than Trump would, right? But that's not the case at all. In the Real Clear Politics averages, we already talked about the Trump-Biden numbers. They're tied. Biden's barely ahead. When you put Biden against DeSantis, Biden is winning by almost 4 percentage points right now in the polls. It's 3.7. And so that is very notable. Trump actually performs better nationally in these polls than DeSantis does against Biden. So it's hard for the DeSantis camp to currently make an argument that he's the better candidate when the polls don't seem to be showing that in terms of the numbers. But I have to mention one other one, because this one also stands out. Trump versus Kamala Harris, right? Look, if Biden is not the candidate for some reason, or he steps aside, the conventional wisdom would be that Kamala Harris would step in and run. But Trump versus Harris has Trump up 5 percentage points, beating her, according to those Real Clear Politics averages. So these are really fascinating stats and numbers here.
Yeah, they certainly are. And, what's really interesting to me as well is the fact that you're starting to see this spill out into a narrative. There's always polls. They're always going to spin that on both sides of the aisle. But we're starting to see a narrative here spill out onto mainstream media. Shows like The View are expressing openly concern about where Biden stands right now. And so that's got to be, when it gets to that level where it becomes sort of a narrative out there that, hey, he's not doing well, it really speaks to what they're seeing internally. And I wonder, Billy, what are the reasons? Do these polls show what people are concerned about? Because we know the economy's got a lot of stress points right now. We also know age is a factor. What do the polls say there?
Yeah, and that CNN poll I referenced, nearly half of Democrats and half of voters are worried about Biden's age. And both candidates have an age problem, but people don't see it as much with Trump. They register it much more when it comes to Biden. And so what you were talking about there is interesting, because these media narratives, you have to differentiate between, is this just a narrative the media are creating because they're in an echo chamber or a box, or is it a narrative based on a panic that is unfolding because something internally is being recognized? And I think it is the latter. When you look at that CNN poll, 67% of Democratic leaning and Democratic voters, they said that they wish they had another option outside of Biden. That is the vast majority of Democrats saying, we do not think this is the right candidate for us. So the age factor, the economy, these factors are driving even people within Biden's party to say, oh boy, we're a year out, maybe we need somebody else.
I think no matter who's in office or what the situation is that's going on, the economy is always the deal. That's always a big thing that people vote with their pocketbooks, right? When they go to the ballot box, what are they thinking about? They're thinking about how much money they have in their pocket, or how much money the potential president could be taking out of their pocket or putting back into it. So the economy will always be a big one. But if we go back to when Trump first won the election, people, particularly evangelical Christians, were so concerned about the Supreme Court. They knew he was likely going to get several Supreme Court nominees. The Supreme Court issue doesn't seem to be as much of a debate at this point. I'm sure it will be. But there's no doubt that Trump reshaped the court. We wouldn't have had the overturning of Roe v. Wade without him having been in the White House. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that abortion is going to become a big issue as we get further into this election cycle.
Yeah, and the Democrats want abortion to be a big issue because they have viewed it as a winning issue, mostly because the Republicans have not really framed the issue in a way that has resonated. So far, we have seen some of the polling reactions, some elections even have purportedly been swayed by this abortion issue. And it's a complicated issue with a lot of different factors to it. I think if the Republicans do come up with a narrative on that, it's going to shift the tides. And so I know a lot of people are talking about that right now. But the court itself, the court's always there as an issue. I think what was so pressing before was you knew you had a couple of seats that were going to be open. If you go back to Hillary versus Trump, Hillary Clinton versus Trump, we knew that was going to be the case. And it drove a lot of people openly to say, look, I don't particularly love Trump as an individual, but I'm going to vote for him. Some people, of course, do love him, but I'm going to vote for him because of the court. We don't hear as much of that talk going on now. But I did want to throw in one thing, because I think it's important when we talk about that history. If you look at Trump versus Clinton, Clinton was up 3 to 10 points at this point in that election cycle, a year out. She was up over Trump 3 to 10 points. Biden was up 8, 9, 10 points. So again, the issues you referenced, going back to the economy, that is driving a situation where we now have Trump and Biden even.
Yeah, well, it's certainly, we got a long way to go. So there's definitely going to be some twists and turns along the road here, and we'll be monitoring them closely here at CBN News and faithmeyer.com as well. And don't forget, you can check out the three of us every weekday morning at 7 a.m. on the Quick Start podcast. We'd love to have you join us, and I'm glad both you guys were able to break this down today. Thanks, guys.